Okay, and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to look at the Commodore 1570 disk drive, both for repair and a quick overview of its specifications as well. And it's a drive that was really a stopgap. It was originally designed to complement the Commodore 128, and it also complements the Commodore 64C as well, because it's a very similar color rather than trying to use the original kind of beigey brown from the original Commodore 64. It's quite an interesting drive because it has a few features from the later 1571, and in fact it's kind of built from the parts bin of the 1571, and it's something that, you know, if you look at the machine itself, you kind of wonder why it was really built, because at the end of the day, most people who bought this form of disk drive, in this case, this shape, would use it primarily with the Commodore 64. And a lot of Commodore 64 owners who upgraded to Commodore 128s just kept their original drive. But there were a few things that this drive was good at. It was faster on the Commodore 128, and it was also a larger capacity. But let's look into the specs of this and look into the fault of this refurbished, or reported to have been a refurbished, disk drive, because it kind of looked like it was just cleaned and then put up for sale. You know, there's not a problem if people want to clean drives and put them up for sale and, you know, try and get a little bit of extra money for something that looks nice, because the drive does look nice. But you know, refurbished means refurbished. It doesn't mean just air dusted out, and that's some of the things you really have to watch for when you buy something that is refurbished. So again, it's a caveat emptor, buyer beware, and let's have a look at this drive. So let's take a look. Now this 1541 was meant to have been refurbished, and it looks very, very clean and tidy. It's you know, been fairly well looked after. It hasn't discolored much, and also it looks as if it's had a little bit of attention on it, but there's still an issue with it. For a refurbished drive, it's not brilliant. So we're going to have a quick look at the specs on this machine. So the specifications of this machine are: it was a Commodore 1570, and it was basically the drive that took over from the original 1541 series, and that includes the variants that was used in the VIC-20. The difference is this had a single head, but it could use burst mode, which is about 10 times faster than the older 1541 drive. It made the drive run at about 3,000 bytes per second, or 3,000 bytes per second faster than the older 1541 drive. Now, the format that this drive used was GCR, group coded recording, and there were 174,848 bytes available on each disk, from which 664 blocks were usable, and it had a limited maximum amount of entries in a directory of 144, which is quite a lot for a single floppy disk. Now, it uses PRG program files, sequential program files, user files, and relative files, and it also has a scratch file function, which is kind of signified by an asterisk. That's usually when the drive hadn't finished writing, or something went wrong, or the disk was pulled out, and so on. But the format was very, very similar to the 1541. Okay, on taking the lid off the drive, you'll notice that it is relatively clean, but this is the problem. The disk gets jammed. It won't go in any further than this, and this is meant to have been a refurbished drive, kind of thinking that the drive had just been cleaned more than anything else. So we're going to have a look, and as you can see, there's a board which is kind of cradled onto the machine in a kind of a Heath Robinson fashion. It's just literally held on by a few screws onto a metal bracket. So we're going to remove the screws now, and then we're going to just take the board out of the way and try and find out what exactly the problem is. There's only a few screws to remove, there's not many, and it doesn't take long at all. So you'll have to forgive the kind of wobbly camera, because I wasn't really going to make a video out of this, but I thought it might be useful for people going forward who have a similar fault. So as you can see, it's just a few cables that actually hold the main board to the chassis itself. Okay, there's not much to disconnect, and again, take your time because the cables can be brittle. Once you've removed the board, you've got a huge metal plate, and now this is the kind of bodge onto the original chassis, so you got to remove the screws on this and then remove the plate itself. Again, there's only a few screws, so you know, just remove them, take the plate away, and as you can see, it's been basically air dusted out. The thing hasn't really been refurbished. Now if you look at the head, it's clean, it's not covered in anything that would cause any problems. There's still some dirt and corrosion inside of the actual drive itself, but you know, basically it's reasonably clean, especially for a drive that hasn't really, or hasn't looked like it's been opened for a long time. Now the rail itself is very securely placed, but there's no give in the actual mount for the spin head. As you can see, it's jamming up against the head itself. Now before we go into finding out what the problem is, I'm just going to show you the back of the board and show you what kind of a bodge it is. On the back of the board you have this kind of insulation pad, and as you can see, there's quite a massive wires with a huge metal plate. So it wasn't a brilliant fix. It was a case of how can we do this the cheapest way possible, and that seems to be the entire kind of reasoning behind this drive. And as you can see, it just sits on the chassis and the board itself. Now getting back to the chassis itself, you can see it's looks okay. It looks like there's not really, shouldn't really be a problem, but as you can see, these arms here are actually stopping the head from lifting as you put the floppy drive in. You see, once you move the arm out of the way, it goes in and it locks perfectly. So what we found is that the actual arm, and you can see how stiff it is to take the disc out itself, so the arms weren't lifting, they weren't lifting at all. And as you can see, it does clear the head, doesn't scratch the disc. Should have probably done it with an old disc, but you know, I was just trying to find out what the problem was. But you can see there's not really a problem with the mechanism itself, and these arms aren't lifting, they aren't lifting the head. Now for a refurbished drive, it's kind of a schoolboy error, so I very much doubt that this was ever really refurbished. And you can see there's a slight bend on the arms themselves. And if we go back to the clip where I was demonstrating the disc going into the drive, you can see where with the screwdriver it just needed a small nudge for the arms to be slightly widened for the disc to go in properly. So if we have a quick look at this again, and as you can see, the disc now goes in correctly every single time. As you can see on the next clip, you can see the drive running on a Commodore 64C. So it's a very easy fix, but one that if you know you didn't really notice the arms, it's very hard to notice, and it's very hard to notice that those arms were minutely out of line. It would be quite a difficult fix because it's not obvious. It's not a very obvious fix at all. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this brief video into a small repair that stopped discs going into a Commodore disk drive. And it's the same mechanism on the early 1541s and even the 1540, the 1570 and so on, and it's all to do with attention to detail and with basically having things bent out of alignment to stop heads and mechanisms lifting to the height that they should be doing. But overall, it's quite a nice drive. I mean, for what I actually paid for it, I'm not going to complain. I wasn't going to send it back to the person or the company it was originally purchased off because it was such a trivial fault. But unless you are able to open it up and have kind of the forethought to find out what's causing the problem. Or if you're not really into opening things up and you just want it to work, then maybe you may have returned the item. But if you come across this fault, you'll know what it is and how easy it is to put right. So thanks for watching, please subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.